From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, mate. The night before the budget is my favourite night of the year. Not because it's about the budget, but because perhaps the most cringy thing that any politician goes through and puts the media through and puts the public through is when the politicians sit there and read their own budget and mark their own homework. Now, they don't expect the audio to be shown anywhere because it's normally just pictures that end up on the 6 p.m. news. Tonight, the most awkward I've ever seen, and here's just a taste.
I think we should be really proud of it. You know, it's ambitious, but it's responsible at the same time.
Great work. The full cringe in a moment or two's time, but I want to talk about some other things, including some updates to big stories that you may well not have heard about to this point in time. We'll get to some of the other stuff a bit later. Great show tonight as well. Looking forward to a big debate with Senator Matt Canavan, with Matt Cunningham from the Northern Territory to talk about this live export issue. I know it's massive for people watching us in regional Australia. We'll get to that in a moment or two's time. But as we know, the Labor Party wants to censor the internet, and they say that the video of the stabbing that happened a few weeks ago in Western Sydney must be banned. You cannot see it, it's too naughty, it's too evil, it will inspire too many other crazies. And the e-safety Karen has told us that in her own words.
It is vital that we don't use social media as a tool for division and fear, but instead as an instrument of solidarity and social cohesion. Online spaces should be safe for everyone, no matter a person's culture, faith, or background.
Yes, Karen. Yes, Karen. Please don't cancel me off the internet, Karen. Please don't tell me that what I say is misinformation, even though we show you the data each and every night. So, of course, rather than talking about radicalisation and teen radicalisation, and there's been like almost 10 kids in the space of a couple of weeks that we now know are accused of horrible things, including a couple who are alleged to have actually gone on to do those horrible things. Oh, no. Everyone was talking about the real villain here. Not radical Islam, not a hate preacher, but a billionaire from Texas.
We're seeing megalomaniacs like Elon Musk going to court to fight for the right to show terrorist content, alleged terrorist content on his platform.
It just shows his arrogance. This is an egotist, totally out of touch. He clearly sees this as a vanity project for himself.
Elon Musk has no social conscience or conscience whatsoever. Quite frankly, the bloke should be jailed. The power that man has, because of that platform that he's on, it's got to stop. That bloke has no conscience. He's an absolute frigging disgrace. And there's nothing else to say about Elon Musk.
Speaking of Karens, don't you love, by the way, poor David Pocock? I say poor David Pocock because I know he'll just do what the government wants in the end and he'll vote for this. But even when Jackie Lambie's just going off like the Catherine wheel, I'm just writing notes. Maybe no one will see that I'm here and agreeing with every word she says. Well, of course, they went off to court and e-safety Karen was able to get about 65 videos taken down because if you saw them, somehow everything would go wrong. Well, today, a court has now overturned the ban that the e-safety Karen wants on those videos. Now, the thing's still playing out in court, so who knows what will happen at the end of the week. But today, a federal court judge has rejected the e-safety commissioner and her application to extend the injunction, which would have forced X to continue blocking the content. Now, whether it's all been freed up tonight or not, we'll all wait and watch and see. But definitely, even for a day, the Karens lost. And no doubt, rather than talking about the radicalisation that leads to the stabbings, we'll go back to talking about Elon Musk. But only after, of course, the greatest budget of all time has fixed everyone's financial problems. I'll get to it in a second. But also another little update today. Another little change in what the official story is. This one in relation to the Bondi stabbing of a few weeks ago, when, as you know, 6 people, including the security guard, died, along with members of the public, murdered by a piece of work who was then taken down by the police. Good to see. But in the days that followed, we kept hearing over and over again that obviously this was a crime that was targeted against women. So much so that the police commissioner even said as such.
It's obvious to me, it's obvious to detectives that seems to be an area of interest that the offender had focused on women and avoided the men.
Now, for obvious reasons, 5 of the 6 people who died were women, so that's how the conclusion was made. But of course, he stabbed more people who he ended up injuring, as well as those that the lives of which he took. Well, today, the Daily Telegraph has done an interesting follow-up where they've spoken to an awful lot of people who still are reeling from the tragedy, the people who were there on the day, who were treating in the hospitals, the police that have been doing the best to investigate here. And I want to read something because it's a little change from what the official line is. The Telegraph can reveal that New South Wales police are no longer convinced that the killer, remember we don't use his name, who was a schizophrenic from Queensland, was targeting women in his knife attack on April the 13th, 2024. Quote, "Do I think that he was targeting women? No, I don't. He stabbed 3 men and a baby. He was just running around stabbing people," says a senior police officer who wasn't willing to put their name to it. But isn't it interesting? Because under the rules of misinformation, if you had questioned the narrative about what had happened in Bondi, well, the official line from the police was that it was the targeting of women. But if at the time you'd said, well, hang on, he also killed a male security guard and he stabbed a baby, and what about other people that he stabbed? Maybe this was just the act of an absolute lunatic who I am glad is no longer on the planet. Let's be very clear about it. And sometimes things are just random. They don't have the connections that other horrible events give us. Well, that, of course, would have been misinformation, which meant if you had posted such a comment from a person like me on social media, this government wants to fine social media companies for you posting what the government believes to not be the official line. Well, isn't it interesting now that the official line is starting to wobble, just as it did on COVID, just as it has multiple times before? One of the many reasons why we cannot let this government, or any government in the future, censor the internet. All right. Let's get to the budget. Now, tomorrow night we're going to have a special edition of the program, 90 minutes. It'll start at 9:30 Eastern time. If you would like to join us, please do so, because my practice, and I've been lucky enough to be doing this for a long time in this dream job of mine, that you get the spin and the interviews and all the journalists that have been stuck together all sort of copying each other's homework. But at 9:30 tomorrow night, the process of people who are not sitting around and learning what's happening in Canberra. Instead, we look at it with our own eyes, without the people pouring sugar in our ears. So we'll tell you the 5 things you need to know about the budget, plus a whole bunch of people that will debate it from all sides. So the great coverage tomorrow night, 9:30. No offence to all the other coverage, but after the main game, we are here to bring home the dessert, and it's going to be great tomorrow night because we are across the tricks, and I'll show you all the different tricks about how they've pulled off a surplus, what they're going to do with taxation, and whether or not they're actually going to do anything of cost of living. But it's all sales pitch from the government right now. And we showed you just moments ago one of the excruciating little things that politicians put the media through because the media demand a little footage to go with their pre-budget speculation stories that run largely in the 6 p.m. news. That means that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer of the day, Liberal, Labor, whatever, they sit there and they flick around through the books. Oh, this is a wonderful budget, isn't it? Because they have to talk. Because if they just sat there and didn't talk, it'd look weird. And if they just sat there and mouthed fake words, it'd be weird. So they just say stuff on the assumption that no one will hear it. It's cringy, it's awkward, it's weird, and this year it's the weirdest it's ever been. Behold, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer patting themselves on the back.
It's a great budget. Provides cost of living support whilst also having that eye on the economy of the future.
And a great budget for women. All those decisions we took on women's safety, housing, the care economy, all these really important ones around driving economic equality for women.
Yeah. No, I think we should be really proud of it. You know, it's ambitious, but it's responsible at the same time. You know, it's got a lot of help for a lot of people, but also some investment in the future. And so, I think the whole team can be really proud of it.
Decisions we make today can set us up for the next decade and beyond.
I could play it over and over and over again as the ultimate metaphor of the bubble within the bubble within the bubble that, of course, exists in Canberra. But as you know, the Treasurer thinks that we're going to be able to, as a country, cut inflation faster than the Reserve Bank. Now, this essentially matters, not just because it's a number, but because it's the Reserve Bank who makes the decision about whether or not they do or don't leave interest rates, put them up, or hopefully, fingers crossed, pull them down. Jim Chalmers says we can fix it all by Christmas.
So the main difference is not necessarily a difference of opinion, but a difference of timing. And so because Governor Bullock released hers before the budget and because ours will be released with the budget, it means it can take into consideration the spending restraint that we're showing, the way that we're designing our cost of living help.
But for the person who's actually making the decisions about interest rates, remember, they say if we can get to between 2 and 3% inflation, then they won't do anything more when it comes to interest rates in terms of increasing, and then slowly but surely will hold and then start to go down. But remember, she doesn't think we get there by Christmas in July. She doesn't think we'll get there by Christmas. She doesn't think that we'll get there by the summer cricket season. She doesn't think it'll be there until even state of origin time next year.
Inflation at the moment is still declining, but it's declining less quickly than we thought it would. So at the moment, we still think that we can make our target of coming back into target range by 2025.
So who do you believe? The politician who's just going to tell you they're doing something about cost of living but won't actually change anything in your life, or the person who's going to have to deal with the consequences of a budget that will find ways to pump even more money into the economy, thus becoming stimulatory and potentially increasing inflation? At the same time, petrol prices, well, they continue to go up, but the taxation on it won't change at all because, of course, the government is absolutely interested in cost of living. For his point, Barnaby Joyce didn't miss.
Haven't we heard this yarn before on basically everything? Well, you got to make a choice. Do you think the RBA got it wrong with their PhDs and all their stuff, and the Treasury got it right, and the Treasurer got it right, the Labor Party got it right?
Jim's a smart guy, isn't he?
Their promises are falling to the ground.
There's a few PhDs in Treasury too, Barnaby.
Like, the promises are falling to the ground. In politics, he's got a PhD in politics, not in economics. The promises are falling to the ground like the leaves in autumn. The question everybody's got to ask themselves is this. It's their third budget. Is your life better now than it was when the Labor Party came into power?
And who could possibly say that it is? An elbow dozen, 12 interest rate rises, not to mention all of the other issues we talk about uphill and down dale. This is where the rubber hits the road, where the BS stops. Now, the BS will continue, of course, tomorrow, and they'll pretend that they've come up with something. I'll tell you by 9:30 tomorrow night whether they've delivered it or not. Through gritted teeth, I'll tell you that they've done the right thing if they have done the right thing, but I think we both know they're just going to say they've done the right thing. So where do the economists sit on this? There's a bloke called Chris Richardson. He's as much of a feature around budget time as any politician. He's been around for decades, constantly always in and around the media. So which way does he think things are going to go?
When governments give you a subsidy, they make your electricity or your rent or your childcare cheaper, that does lower measured inflation. There's a direct impact. The Bureau of Stats tells us about that. But it also gives families more money to spend. That's why governments are doing it. That extra spending, that indirect channel, can actually make inflation worse rather than better. So, great that governments are rearranging the pain. It's less clear that they are reducing the pain of inflation.
So that's the polite way of saying the Reserve Bank. Of course, the puffery and telling us how amazing, formerly Grim Jim, now Jim from Queensland, who's here to help you. We talked about this in some detail last night, all the puffy suck-up pieces. Oh, here he is buying flowers on Mother's Day. Oh, are the cameras here? How did that happen? Well, interestingly, the flowers are actually a little bit of a metaphor because just like everything else, flowers have gone up since this bloke became the Treasurer. Somebody went and actually had a chat to a bunch of florists who came back and said, among other things, everything has increased in price. The cost of growing the flowers in Australia has gone up, wages have gone up, super's gone up, casual rates have gone up, especially after COVID, which is why the cost of the flowers that the Treasurer is going to give himself, along with the Prime Minister and the Mean Girl, for how amazing their budget is. But the reality is, if you were somebody who bought flowers yesterday, you may notice they're a little higher than they were a couple of years ago. Of course, nothing to do with the government at all. Nothing at all. And then there were the puff piece. There was this particularly unique puff piece in the Sydney Morning Herald where they did coverage on the coverage of the puff pieces. So think about how sort of, Chris Nolan Inception. This is starting to, the dreams within a dream. Well, this is the coverage within the coverage of the Treasurer. Now, this, of course, was an interview he did with SBS that we showed you last night when he was shown people who were dealing with the cost of living. But let's get to the puff. Jim Chalmers' Sunday run begins at 3:46 a.m. and it's the warm-up for the budget. Oh. Now, in it, Jim Chalmers has 4 affirmations scrawled across the top of his talking points. 41, SH, HH and WH. Now, these are the guiding principles of the greatest treasurer of all time. SH means steady hands, and that's because they need to keep inflation in check. HH stands for hard head, a prompt about the need to find value for money. Oh. While WH is warm heart. He needs to be reminded about warm heart. A reminder that a government plans to do and must deliver cost of living in the budget. So because he writes notes on top of the notes about the lies they're going to sell you on the budget, oh, he's so well prepared. Thank goodness Dr. Chalmers, with his scalpel, is here to help. Full coverage tomorrow night, 9:30, here on Sky News. Believe me, be here. If you only watch one Paul Murray live a year, that's the one to watch. 9:30 tomorrow night, and be there for the whole 90 minutes because I'll have plenty to say. Now, we all know that Stephen Miles is, fingers crossed, headed for the political wood chipper towards the end of the year. But let's be honest, the Queensland Labor Party is good at changing the subject. They've won elections they definitely shouldn't have. But certainly, when you look at the West Ipswich by-election and plenty of others, there are people, no matter how desperate he looks with his Queensland Maroons hat on, they just walk past him. No, I'm not voting Labor. I'm not voting. No, bugger off, mate. Not interested. So he's doing everything he possibly can to somehow pull this one out of the fire. And he thinks that he's going to be able to do what they weren't able to do in Canberra, and that's call the supermarkets of Australia to order. That he will be able to single-handedly prove in a hand-selected committee dominated by the Labor Party in the Queensland Parliament what they weren't able to do in Canberra. Now, remember when it was in Canberra, the CEOs of Woolies and Coles, they got a tongue-lashing from the Greens, swearing and everything. Reality, of course, nothing changes, nothing will change, but they all had their little moment in the sun. And so it was, the inquiry was there in Brisbane today. Now, Stephen Miles was all fired up and ready to go because they were going to finally put the sword to these evil, evil supermarkets.
Queenslanders would like to hear is a supermarket boss say we could have done better.
And that's the weirdest part. He's on the committee. Now, normally, parliamentary committees are backbenchers when it comes to the opposition, shadow ministers, but essentially the Premier or the Minister doesn't sit on the panel, but because he wants the whole background on the 6 p.m. news of him sitting there in the Parliament waving his fingers at the CEOs, that somehow magically the people of Queensland will work out, oh, he's on our side, because, you know, he wears the Maroons cap. Seriously. Now, as for the actual bosses of the supermarkets, they've told him to go jump. None of the CEOs are willing to sit there and go through the tongue lashing that happened at the federal, so they've actually sent a whole bunch of underlings. But of course, the fact that the CEO of Coles and Woolies wasn't there to be finger waved at by Giggles, he's very annoyed.
What we've seen from the supermarkets is they just don't seem to get it. They just don't seem to get how the impact of their prices and their practices are hurting Queensland households and hurting Queensland farmers. In particular, Coles is thumbing their nose at Queenslanders, thumbing their nose at the Queensland Parliament.
Just a quick mental note. Think about his comments there about Coles, that particularly Coles is causing trouble for people. Just put a pin in it. As for who's actually representing the supermarkets, they've got high-ranking people who are based in Queensland that are turning up in front of it. The supermarket giants have elected to send senior staff with government and industry relations people, the head of public affairs that were there on the behalf of Coles, the chief commercial officer and the Queensland director of Woolies were the ones that were sitting down. So there were people that were willing to cop the tongue lashing, but it's not as sexy as yelling at the CEOs. But interestingly, another person who was on the inquiry today is the Shadow Agriculture Minister. The Shadow Agriculture Minister is Tony Perrott. I had to double check his name. And he was there asking questions. But he was booted out of the inquiry that Stephen Miles is sitting on as well, that's dominated by the Labor Party in the lower house, and it is, again, a show trial, because he tried to introduce a photo today. Before I show you the photo, he was told he wasn't allowed to do it. That was therefore ruled disorderly. Therefore, he was booted out of the room. You cannot ask any more questions for at least 60 minutes. Why? Because the photo was this photo. The photo of the bloke who said what about Coles? This photo's not from 5 years ago. It ain't from 5 weeks ago. It's barely from 5 days ago. This was when he was at Beef Week last week in Rockhampton, and he's cooking up a storm with a bunch of school kids at an event sponsored by Coles. Now, for food safety, maybe he had to wear the hat. Perhaps he could have turned it around, though. But can you believe that the show trial is so thin in its political objectives that someone trying to introduce a photo that kind of contradicts the I hate Coles of Stephen Miles is booted out of the committee for a full hour? Oh, yeah. They're committed to the big issues, aren't they, the Miles government? Now, whether you go to Coles, Woolies, Aldi, IGA or whatever corner store, can you do me a favour? And I did say this 4 years ago, but I'm going to say it again now. Even though the cost of that item probably is more than it was 4 years ago, can you get some disinfectant? Because we're going to need it after we get rid of this mob towards the end of the year in Queensland. It's up to you, Queensland. I made the case before, it didn't work. But I reckon the case is going to land, and land hard, in the form of Queenslanders with a size 9 funk into the backside of this bloke and all of the other fools that are with him. Youth crime in Queensland and everywhere else in the country remains quite a substantial issue, one that, of course, politicians aren't particularly interested in dealing with. Because we have, despite the fact that there's so many teenagers involved in all sorts of things, right, literally from terrorism stuff in New South Wales and, of course, in Western Australia, all the way through to the car thefts in regional Australia. But, of course, there is a big move on, not to get rid of youth crime, but the idea is that we shouldn't call it a crime anymore if a person is of a certain age. Now, for years in Australia, the age of criminal responsibility has been 10. Anything under, you can't go before anything. You will not be punished. But a magical way of making the number of young people who get locked up for the crimes they commit, not falsely accused, they commit, means that we should move the number from 10 to 12 and in some states move it up to 14. So the crimes still happen, we just won't hold anyone responsible for it. And well-meaning organisations have websites and campaigns to raise the age. And in Victoria, they are starting to make these changes, where right now the age of criminal responsibility is 12. It'll move up to 14 by 2027, and as you can see, the same will happen next year in the ACT. Now, there's a lot of pressure on every other state government, but they're not bending at this moment in time. But I want to talk an event that took place in the beautiful city of Dubbo over the weekend. I love Dubbo. Been there plenty of times. We did an Our Town there. We were there for royal tours. This is a beautiful part of Australia. Shout out to everyone who's watching us right now in Dubbo. And on the weekend, they had their big show, the big agricultural show, one of the big moments in town. All the usual things from animal events to craft events, you know, like the Easter show or the Echo or the Melbourne show. But of course, this one is for the local area in and around Dubbo. Well, a horrible crime is alleged to have taken place there, with a 16-year-old had a knife held to his throat. Apparently, this was all in part of a robbery. Now, that matter, again, will be dealt with by the courts. But something that was found out within 2 hours of that particular incident was that there was a stabbing list that had been put together by an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old of people that they were apparently thinking about going after. The boys, aged 11 and 12, handed themselves into police on Saturday, and they admitted to committing the hoax list, they now call, of the 2024 stab. Now, I want to put this in context. If they had put that stab list together in Victoria or the ACT, the 11-year-old would have no responsibility. by next year in the ACT, both of them would not be punished for even committing the stabbing, let alone the hoax list of the people to potentially be stabbed. That is the consequences. When people say we must change the age of responsibility because too many people, and particularly Indigenous kids, end up in court. Now, while that may well be the case, that there are too many Indigenous kids that end up in court, and I don't know what the cultural heritage is of anyone involved in what happened at the Dubbo show over the weekend. The reality is that we would like to live in a society where if you draw up a list of people you're going to stab, let alone if they went on to stab, that person would be held criminally responsible. But right now, if it happened in the next couple of years, if it happened in Victoria or it happened in the ACT, nothing would happen. Does anyone honestly think that that is a reasonable system? I don't. Big news today when it comes to breast cancer. There was a very interesting announcement which came out and was put up in the Financial Review, who focused on this today, that there may well be a system that would be able to reduce the risk of breast cancer by 50%. Now, this is huge news because breast cancer kills thousands of women, a few blokes as well, but mainly, of course, women each and every year. It may well be the reason why this Mother's Day, Mum was no longer around. So I was very interested in this story. And it says that while the science is sound, it's not widely known that anti-hormone drugs can apparently reduce the risk of breast cancer. In 2013, a Professor Phillips began working on a new system at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. It is now functioning and open to women across Australia. Now, there is a website that I would like to give you, and I would like the women of Australia to go and fill out the survey. Now, again, I know only what I've read here on the in the articles, but the website, and I'll find the exact website detail for you in a moment or two's time. I thought we were going to show that, but that is in fact the front page of it. Well, this is an opportunity for the women of Australia to reach out and potentially be able to reduce their risk of breast cancer. If that can happen by 50%, then we are going to be living in a much better country with much healthier people, and all of us would be united in how important that particularly would be going into the future. It is Peter Mac, or one word, petermac.org/I-prevent. petermac.org/I-prevent. I'll make sure that the details are up on our socials, but I apologise. I wanted to tell it, not just show it, but that is what is in fact in front. In the next hour or so, Donald Trump will head back to court for yet another week in the who knew what and when about the documents case in and around the hush money payments that made its way to Stormy Daniels. This week's the biggest week yet, because Michael Cohen, the former lawyer, the bloke who was being paid in instalments, well, he will be testifying about whether those instalments were knowingly a way of falsifying documents, or the defence will be able to poke many holes in a bloke who has gone to jail for lying in the past, that being Michael Cohen. But as I told you last night, there was a rally with almost 100,000 people in New Jersey. Now, this is a state that is a hard blue state that Republicans are not going to win, but if people were willing to turn up or travel, that's a good thing for Donald Trump. But even those of us that support Trump, would love him to beat Biden, are a little confused why he said this when he was talking about how the world is emptying their mental asylums and sending those people to become supposed refugees in America.
Silence of the Lambs. Has anyone ever seen the Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. He oftentimes would have a friend for dinner. Remember the last scene? Excuse me, I'm about to have a friend for dinner as this poor doctor walked by. I'm about to have a friend for dinner, but Hannibal Lecter, congratulations, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. We have people that are being released into our country that we don't want in our country.
The late, great Hannibal Lecter, who clearly doesn't exist, never existed, but apparently is an example of the mental asylums that are being... I don't want Biden to win. I support the idea of Trump returning to the presidency, but he might have to do slightly better than that. But I get it. There's a lot on his mind right now, especially this week. You'll get all the details tomorrow morning with Peter Stefanovic in First Edition. Quick break, back with more. Lots to talk about, including for regional Australia and everyone else who remembers when the Gillard government watched Four Corners one night and then just stopped the live export industry. Well, this mob in Canberra, still living in the same bubble, still trying to double down on the bad decisions of the past. They are going to get rid of live export. What's it going to mean? We'll talk about it next here on Paul Murray Live. Oh, I'm excited. We've got Sam Crosby with us in the Man Cave, and he is going to defend everything this government's ever done, ever will do.
Absolutely.
Speaking of, well, you might have fun here because Senator Matt Canavan, of course, is here as well, joining us from Canberra in the lead up to the budget. And the great Matt Cunningham, stand up, one of our favourites, the best in the business in the territory. And I think I'd put him in top 5 in the country for journos, mate. I'm sorry to put that weight in your saddlebag, but I love you, and I think you're one of the best in the business, not just here at Sky. All right, pleasantries over. So, last week, we had the Prime Minister with the sort of semi-new hat, walking around Beef Week in Rockhampton. I'm a friend of the farmer. Toto loves beef. I'll eventually get to a good impersonation, but you get the point. Did you know he grew up in a housing community? It was a terrible story. Anyway, he's running around with the farmers, right, pretending I'm a friend of the farmer, and he waits until a few days later and assuming that the farmers are so stupid that they don't have access to the internets or television or radio, and they will completely be okay that the same bloke who pretends he's the friend of the farmer at Beef Week is now going to ban live exports. Now, he was around the cabinet table when it made its overnight decision after watching Four Corners back in 2010. And as we know, Labor, it always goes back to the same bad idea. They've just come up with a different way of doing it. Now, Senator, the claim is this is going to be okay because we're not just turning it off tomorrow, we're doing it over a whole bunch of years, which means that currently the cattle farmers of Northern Australia will be able to just slowly but surely turn themselves into wind farms, and that'll be okay.
Well, Paul, this decision just at this stage affects those sheep farmers that are exposed to the live sheep industry. The concern is, of course, that the animal activists, animal welfare activists won't stop at sheep. They'll move on to cattle next. But it is a cowardly move by this government. As you said, the Prime Minister was there in Rockhampton last week at Beef Week, at a collection of farmers and graziers who were very interested in this decision. A lot of people talking about it because, as I say, they are very concerned about the flow-on effects to the cattle industry. And I'm sure we'll find out, perhaps through estimates, Senate estimates, when this decision was made. And I'm sure it probably was made before the Prime Minister was there, so he knew he had it in his back pocket. But he was just cowardly. He's gutless. There's no other word for it. He's gutless not to tell them up front while he was with them, as you say, wearing the big hat. And then he scurried away, and they dropped this announcement out over the weekend just ahead of the budget, hoping the budget swamps it all. But thousands of jobs now in Western Australia on the line. The WA Premier, the Labor WA Premier, objects to Labor's policy because it's going to cruel a whole industry. And why do we need to shut down a whole industry? I mean, if we want to tackle inflation, we have to become more productive. We have to invest in parts of our economy that are making things, that are making money for our country, that are producing jobs. And there's enormous demand for our high-quality live sheep. They've got an excellent animal welfare record. There's been a few contraventions, but they've been fixed. Excellent in the last few years. There's no reason to do this. The only reason the Labor Party is doing this is because they need the preferences of the animal welfare parties. So this is about protecting the jobs of the Labor Party, and they're going to sacrifice thousands of jobs in Western Australia to do it.
Sam, I'll get to you in a second, but Matt, you remember, you lived it, you reported it, right? When it was about cattle and it was the Northern Territory, about what those consequences were. I'm completely aware that it's about sheep and it's more so specifically in and around Western Australia where there's going to be particular issues. But you've seen this play out before, but if they say it's just a little more notice and a little more time, then it will all end up being okay. What's your sense of it?
Oh, it's already having a massive impact.
I don't think there was a more devastating...
I'm going to call you Senator and Matt. Matt, your turn in Darwin.
Sam, he's going to be a senator, I'm sure. That's the progression. Or a mayor or something.
I don't think there was a more... I don't think there was a more devastating decision that a government made that impacted the Northern Territory than this one. And people are still talking about it today, some 13 years on, Paul. In fact, a lot of the people who were affected by the Gillard government's ban on live exports are still waiting for this government to agree to the settlement of the class action that has been running now for more than a decade. But I think the bigger concern here is that now that live sheep exports, the government's committed to banning them, that live cattle is next. And you get an indication of what's coming from a tweet today from the Teal MP, Kylie Tink, who congratulates the government for doing this, says it's something the people of North Sydney have been calling for since before the election, and then goes on to say it's disappointing, though, that we have to wait 4 years and there's still no plan to end live beef cattle exports. That tweet will send a shiver down the spine of every live cattle exporter in the Northern Territory, and the prospect of the Albanese government going into minority government at the next election will absolutely scare the living daylights out of them, because it was in 2011 when the Gillard government was relying on the Greens and independents to stay in power that they made that original decision. And God only knows, people will be thinking here, what happens if there is a minority government supported by the Greens and the Teals come 2025? What will happen to live exports from the Northern Territory?
Agree. Animal welfare and the politics of it. Again, many people elected to parliaments exclusively on animal welfare. But by doing it over a long period of time, it may well taper, but it doesn't change the financial pain for the people whose life is completely linked.
No, if you do it well, it won't have much pain at all, because you're going to process the meat in Australia. That's the whole idea, right? You give them 4 years, and I'm sure that 4 years then becomes 4, 5, 6 years.
They're already suffering.
But the idea is that you process the meat here in Australia, and I'm all in favour of that.
In Indonesia, they want to kill the cattle live. The halal killing means they don't want it boxed here.
Sure, but you can do halal here. You can do halal here. Halal is pretty easy, right? You use a knife or whatever, you stun the thing, you use a knife, you say a prayer, you face it east or whatever. It's pretty easy to do to get halal certification wherever, right? But the point is you can do it here in Australia, and that means jobs. If you go to Coonabanabran, which is a little town out in they had an abattoir get closed down there. I don't know, 2010, 2012, something like that. And it decimated the town. Decimated the town. And these are the little sort of towns that we're talking about. If you can build an abattoir there, that employs 40, 50 people. They're good jobs. They're, permanent jobs. Why wouldn't we be in favour of that? And yeah, okay, the animal rights issues, great.
Demonstrates.
But why not, Senator?
This just demonstrates why the Labor Party are so hopeless at business. The customer wants the live sheep. That's what they want in the Middle East. They want them for religious reasons. They want them because they don't have as much refrigeration as we do. So the box beef is not going to do that. Box sheep, I should say. It's not going to do them any good. It's your box sheep meat. And so already, Sam, these countries in the Middle East are going to South America. They can get the sheep elsewhere. They can go elsewhere. They don't need us. And they're already doing that. And so if you knew anything about the sheep industry right now, you'd know it's on its knees, because well before the government shutdown date in 2028, the market's already shifting, and sheep prices now are at record lows. Graziers are having to shoot their flocks. It's terrible. It's very sad. It's having a flow-on effect. I spoke to graziers at Beef Week last week. Some of them are in beef and sheep. And it's already having a flow-on effect to sheep prices in eastern markets, just as the live cattle ban did. This is a complete and utter disaster. There won't be those jobs there in the abattoirs because the customer doesn't want them. And if you're in business, Sam, if you're successful in business, you've got to meet the customer demand. And there's no reason we can't do that with strong animal welfare standards as we've been doing in the live sheep ban. This is a political ban, not one that's based on any kind of science.
All right, let's get to, again, Matt in Darwin. So we're being very clear with everyone here. Senators, future senators, whatever, we're all here. No, appreciate it. So, Matt, you've obviously seen federal politics through the lens of the Northern Territory for a long period of time. And you know that budget night is this, big carry-on. And then you've got to find, what's in it for the Northern Territory. Often not much. But what do you think about the pre-game here, where the pre-game is all that they're going to do something about cost of living? I tell you what, the rabbit that he's going to have to pull out of the hat is going to be taller than Sam. And tall is Sam. He's a very statuesque gentleman, okay? But there is no rabbit the size of Sam that a treasurer is going to be able to pull out of a hat. So has this government already kind of spun itself into a corner of expectations?
Well, he's talking up a big game, isn't he? And I think it's pretty brave, perhaps admirable. I don't know. We'll see whether, I guess time will tell. But he's pretty brave saying that, we're going to have inflation, back between 2 and 3% by Christmas, because, I'm not sure how many levers the government can actually pull to make this happen. And the only ones that I think they're able to pull and they're going to pull in the budget would perhaps cause inflation to rise rather than come down. So, I'd be backing Michelle Bullock over Jim Chalmers when it comes to where inflation's going to be come December. I mean, I've seen you go through the pomp and ceremony that surrounds the budget, and to be fair at some level to the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, it is the media that insists that the politicians show up for these.
Stop playing for access.
It's
terrible.
I think most of them would rather not be there. but it never looks good for anyone, really. Yeah.
Okay, bring back the awkward grab team. All right, come on, James, go find it. We're going to play it again because it's a little bit like, what's the Babadook or something? As soon as you mention it, it must appear. So if I say it 3 times, or is that Beetlejuice? I never forget. But still, what we're talking about here, the super awkward, wonderful moment when they're sort of posing for the cameras. They don't just go, so they have to sort of say things to each other. And it's so awkward. It's so bad.
I've been there.
And I love playing it. Play it again, Sam.
It's a great budget. Provides cost of living support whilst also having that eye on the economy of the future.
And a great budget for women. All those decisions we took on women's safety, housing, the care economy, all these really important ones around driving economic equality for women.
Yeah. No, I think we should be really proud of it. It's ambitious, but it's responsible at the same time. It's got a lot of help for a lot of people, but also some investment in the future. And so I think the whole team can be really proud of it.
Decisions we make today can set us up for the next decade and beyond.
I love it. Senator, as you said, you've had to go through that ritual. I know it's awkward, but who cares? If they feel a little bit of pain, as opposed to the people who actually pay for the budget, fine by me, baby.
Well, I normally just talk about other things. I mean, that was so awkward because they're not going to play those grabs anyway. So you start talking about the footy or, what are you doing on the weekend? What did you have for dinner last night? Something a bit more natural. But that was painful. That was very painful.
I love it. And Matt, you know what I particularly love is there'll be someone somewhere inside the phalanx whose job it is to hate watch this program, as opposition research. Enjoy your pain. Because I will do it every year, every time. It's awful. Anyway, about the actual budget, Sam. They are setting expectations. Yeah, they set expectations, so they have to come up with something. And I think that it's impossible for any government to come up with the solution to all the world's problems. But that's how they're marketing it.
Look, maybe there's a problem with their spin. I don't know. Let's talk about the actual substance. And to your point of cost of living, inflation is the single biggest problem because that leads to interest rates.
Correct.
And I saw your promo beforehand, and yep, there's a disagreement between the Treasury and...
It's called an editorial. But
the editorial between the Treasury and the... RBA. Can we all cast our minds back to...
but they're both wrong all the time.
But this is the point. The previous governor was on there saying, we're going to have historic lows until 2024.
Rates will never
and then
go up.
3 months later, he was jacking him up a point at a time.
This treasurer sacked that person and replaced them. Sure. This is the hand-picked one.
And so just so we're all clear, it's not actually Jim Chalmers sitting down there on his little typewriter writing the budget and doing his abacus calculations. He's got a guy called Dr. Stephen Kennedy, who's the head of Treasury.
Who, by the way, is paid twice as much as the Prime Minister.
Sure, that is thousands of people. This guy's got PhDs in economics and all sorts of things.
And they get it wrong every year.
Sure, but these are teams of boffins. These are teams of boffins going at it with the spokesperson of the Treasurer and the Reserve Bank Governor being the two heads of these things. So it's not as though Dr. Jim's up there saying, I reckon it's going to be X and I reckon...
But
these are a bunch of assumptions.
Oh, so he's just the front man of the band singing somebody else's song.
No. The assumptions are based on mountains of economic data. And it's absolutely reasonable to question an institution that gets the numbers wrong.
My made-up number versus your made-up number.
It's reasonable to have a discussion about whose number's right and whose number's wrong.
I've got to take a break here, so maybe you pick it up after. But, Senator, you've got 15 seconds if you want to bang back on it. Go.
Why does he get 15
seconds?
Just
quickly
because I like him.
It's the government. It's the government's figures. They're informed by Treasury, but ultimately they're signed off by the government, by the Treasury.
I like him. I love you all. But he gets the final say. Host does as well. Quick break, back with more, including this photo of Stephen Miles, okay? Jump onto the socials, and I would love you to be able to put a caption underneath this idiot. The bloke who hates Coles this week, but he was wearing their merch last week. More in a sec. Good news if you live in Parkes or anywhere near it, because Our Town is coming to your part of Australia at the end of this month. I cannot wait to turn up, to play with the dish. I've got the Prime Minister's approval. No, anyway, we'll be there. Looking forward to it. If you want to join us, Parkes for Our Town on Sunday, the 26th of May, please send me an email to ourtown@skynews.com.au. We're here with Matt Cunningham, who is in Darwin, Senator Matt Canavan, who is in Canberra, and Senator not Matt, Sam Crosby, who is here, of course, in the Man Cave. Now, I don't know whether it's the Pons Institute or it's something a little bit more serious, but the a population research institute put out at the end of last week about whether people have a sense of belonging in Australia, right? There's been a couple of thousand people part of the survey, so not insignificant. What was shocking to read, though, was this, that people who were between the ages of 18 and 29, in Sydney, only 15% of them have a sense of belonging. 22% have a sense of belonging in Melbourne, 22% having a sense of belonging in Brisbane. Matt, we always talk on some level about problems with kids, all the rest of it here, but what the hell is going on when we are talking about people who don't have a sense of belonging, who are in the absolute prime of their life in this country? What does that tell you?
Well, I think it might be a few things. Sorry, I said
Matt. I mucked it up. Senator. I'll get this right.
Okay.
I've only hosted the show for 15 years, but I'll get it eventually.
The funny thing is, over the years, you've often got me mixed up with Matt Cunningham. Yeah, we should never do this. Like, you get me mixed up all the time. Now I'm getting myself mixed up with Matt Cunningham.
I've got better. That took me 3 years, but
Which is not a bad thing. He's a great bloke.
Matt's
a great bloke. He's fantastic, as you say. Fantastic journalist. Great company. Anyway, so I think it's my turn. But I think, that the education system has to be a culprit here. I just don't think our schools are instilling pride in our country as perhaps they once were, and you're getting the obvious result. Look, I would also say, though, that our broader society and economy is failing young people as well, and so that's got to be playing a part too. The most important thing I think we could do to help people have more pride in their own country is to help them own a piece of it. If you own some of the land and the real estate of a nation, you're more likely to want to protect it and defend it and have a stake in it, literally have a stake in it. And that's obviously becoming harder and harder for people because they're just priced out. And that's why I come back to it. I think we've got to build new cities. We've got to build new areas of our country, like Darwin and others, where people can get a start. You just can't continually stack people up in Sydney and Melbourne, expect young people are going to have the same opportunities as their grandfathers.
All right, so as I mentioned before, Donald Trump, he's, got to stretch the wings. 100,000 people turning up in New Jersey. If you're pro-Biden, that's a bit of a worry because it's a massive sign of something going on. Either they were turning up for the fun or they were willing to travel to back the great man in. And for some reason, he used as an example of somebody being dumped from mental institutions into America, a person that doesn't exist.
Silence of the Lambs. Has anyone ever seen a Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. He oftentimes would have a friend for dinner. Remember the last scene? Excuse me, I'm about to have a friend for dinner as this poor doctor walked by. I'm about to have a friend for dinner, but Hannibal Lecter, congratulations, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. We have people.
Matt in Darwin, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Like, I love me some Trump and I love me some wild Trump, but you can't pretend Hannibal Lecter is crossing the border.
Well, and the late great. I mean, I don't know. Like, Trump just baffles me a lot of the time, and this case in point as well. I don't know what the hell he is talking about, and I don't know why he is praising Hannibal Lecter as late and great. But I don't understand a lot of things that come out of his mouth, and yet I still think there's going to be a hell of a lot of people who are going to vote for him later this year. So
that's
I don't know,
Sam.
Work it out. I think it just shows you the state that US politics is in at the moment. Really.
Yeah, give me the bumper sticker version here, Sam. That's the guy who's currently beating your guy.
Sure, and look, everyone gets that Joe Biden is well and truly past his prime, and he is old as hell, right? Yeah. This bloke's a couple of years behind him. Clearly, there is cognitive decline there. You'll remember the cognitive decline test that he did, the man-woman TV window, and I said that right, man-woman TV window. He's clearly losing his marbles.
Can't, Sam. He's the funniest guy around. He's so funny.
He wasn't joking. But he wasn't joking. Look at the clip.
I love him. That's why
he wasn't joking.
He is funny. He is so funny.
All right, gang.
Comedy's dead, but Donald Trump is saving stand-up comedy, single-handedly.
Yeah. All right. I think Tony Hinchcliffe is as well. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you again very soon, but different Matts on different nights. But you can all come back anytime you want. All right. Quick break. Back with more What You Say About Stephen Miles. Next. I've talked too long tonight, so it's time for the late debate. But I will tell you, there's an awful lot of very funny people. The best caption that I think so far explains the Stephen Miles thing comes from Andrew. It says he's going down, down, just like the prices used to. Here's the late debate.